Hello again, friends. It's good to be back together and to have another opportunity to talk about the faith that we share and hold together. I don't know about you, but one of my favorite things to do in the spring and fall seasons is to sit out into the evening by a roaring campfire. As the sun goes down and as the stars come up, it's just beautiful and peaceful to look up at the starry sky above. But if I were to take a telescope and to look at that very same sky that I look at while I'm sitting by a campfire, especially a powerful telescope, I would look up at those stars at the very same sky, and I would begin to see some things that I wasn't able to see with just my naked eye. If I looked through a telescope, particularly a good one, I might see that what I had been calling stars way up above me, some of them were stars, but some others may actually turn out to be planets. Some may turn out to be satellites or other debris moving through the atmosphere. And the reason for that is that when I look through a telescope, I look through a lens. And if I look through a good lens, that lens helps me to see more clearly what had already been all around me and right before me. That lens helps me to see the world around me more accurately and more truly than what I had been able to see just with my own eye before. Theology helps us in a very similar way. Sometimes we don't think that theology is practical, but in truth, different theological concepts give us lenses through which we can look and see the world. And if they're good lenses, they'll hopefully help us to see the world in more accurate, more true, more faithful ways. And so today we're going to start talking about one of several theological concepts that are particularly important either to us as Christians of the larger tradition or as Lutherans. And so today we're going to take some time and we're going to talk about the theological concept of original sin. Recently, Emily was going through some of her old emails and computer files, and she came across this picture that I'm going to put up in front of you now. This is actually a picture that was taken on Emily and one of our first dates together. We were in college at Eastern University right outside of Philadelphia, and I decided that I wanted to take her on a nice date and do something that she would absolutely love. So we hopped on the train, we took a day trip into the city of Philadelphia, and there was this fancy chocolate cafe that was in the heart of the city, and I just knew that Emily would love it because she tends to love all things chocolate. And so we were at this fancy cafe and we were sitting across the table from each other. We got all manners of fancy chocolate drinks and chocolate snacks, and everything was going wonderfully. And as we sat across the table from each other, I suddenly felt like I had to cough. And initially I didn't think much of it. I thought I would just suppress it and we would move on and I wouldn't make a big noisy cough in front of the date that I was trying to impress. To try and suppress the cough, I also decided to take a drink of water. And as I took a drink of water, I was trying to swallow it to suppress the cough when I realized that I wasn't going to be able to suppress the cough, and I wasn't going to be able to swallow the water either. And before I realized what was happening, and before I could react, I had a very violent cough with a mouthful of water, and I spit water all over Emily's face in a fancy chocolate cafe in the middle of Philadelphia on one of our very first dates. It wasn't at all what I was hoping that day would be like. But as I look back on that event that happened years ago now, I am thankful that at least it gives me an illustration that can maybe help us understand original sin a little bit better. Because original sin, while we often like to think of sin as simply being nothing more than, well, I made a bad choice that I just need to stop making that bad choice and I need to decide I'm going to make good choices, original sin talks about sin as something far more challenging than just making a bad decision. It's something that's gone wrong deep within us. It comes from inside of us, just like a cough that comes out of nowhere. Additionally, original sin is not something that we can just choose to overpower and snuff out and stifle down. It's something that will overcome us if we think that we're strong enough to challenge it, just like the cough that overcame me on that day. And finally, original sin is something that when it plays out, it makes things to be not quite what we had intended them to be, or what would have been really nice had they been. I was having a lovely date with Emily, and it looked like everything was perfect, and the wonderful image that we have of the dates that we go on with the people we care about usually doesn't include an image of us spitting water in their face. And so original sin, it comes from within, it's stronger than we are, and it makes things to be not quite what they were supposed to be. As we continue talking about original sin, I would like to read to you an excerpt from what we call the Augsburg Confession, which is one of the principal writings that Lutherans look to when we try to understand what is Lutheranism, what do Lutherans believe. The Augsburg Confession now is held within a larger work that we call the Book of Concord. And so the Book of Concord, if you ever want to know what do Lutherans think and what is Lutheranism, how do we understand the world, and how do we see the faith, the Book of Concord is sort of the rule and norm for understanding what do Lutherans believe and who are we as a Lutheran people. And so in the Augsburg Confession, which is one of the principal documents within the Book of Concord, there's actually a section that talks about original sin. And what the Reformers write in that section is, "It is taught among us that since the fall of Adam, all men who are born according to the course of nature are conceived and born in sin. That is, all men are full of evil lust and inclinations from their mother's wombs, and they're unable by nature to have true fear of God and true faith in God. Moreover, this inborn sickness and hereditary sin is truly sin, and it condemns to the eternal wrath of God all those who are not born again through baptism and the Holy Spirit. Rejected in this connection are the Pelagians and others who deny that original sin is sin, for they hold that natural man is made righteous by his own powers, thus disparaging the sufferings and the merit of Christ." Now, friends, I know that statement, it has some striking language, and before we let ourselves get too shocked by some of the strong statements in there, let's just unpack a little bit of what that document is saying. One, it's talking about sin as something that is hereditary. It's in us from the beginning. It's not just a choice we make, but original sin is something that it's kind of like a corruption that grows within us all of our lives. And so before we were born, there's this brokenness that's just a part of who we are. This writing also will be very stern to say it's something that not just makes us make bad choices, but it makes it hard for us to see clearly who God is and what he has done. It makes it hard for us to appreciate God. It makes it hard for us to, on our own power, put our faith in Jesus. And so that's why for Lutherans, we put such an emphasis on baptism and on the sacraments where God is the one doing the work, because we recognize that original sin makes it impossible for me to be this great faithful champion who decides to choose Jesus and I'll always live for him from here on out. In truth, if I am able to put my faith in Christ, I have God to thank for giving me that faith. It's by his grace that I am able to be strong enough to have that faith. It's not by any strength that comes within me, because original sin is too strong. In this document, we might sometimes ask, why are we making such a fuss about original sin when it seems such a down, sad, negative topic? Why are we spending so much time talking about something that's not really chipper and cheery like we'd like to be? And I think I'd like to just point out two reasons for why it's important to not downplay original sin. One is that if original sin is real, then it's real regardless of whether we want to believe in it or not. If I'm walking on a trail and I see that there's a big root sticking up out of the ground, and I just tell myself I don't believe in that root, what's probably going to happen is I'm going to get my foot caught in it and it's going to trip me. Because if something's real, whether I believe in it or not, it's still real. And so if original sin is true, then it does us no good to just pretend it's not. And two, if we don't take original sin seriously, what we inevitably end up doing is we start patting ourselves on the back far more than we deserve, and we start underappreciating the incredible lengths to which Christ has gone on our behalf. That is, in that document when they mention the Pelagians, the big issue with the Pelagians were that they didn't believe in original sin per se, and they thought if we just try hard enough, we can be good enough, and we can, pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, and we'll just choose God, and we'll be faithful, and we'll live the way Christ wants us to live. We just have to put our head to the grindstone and decide to do that. But what Christians have often said is, as much as we try, sin is really, really strong, and the only way that we're going to get to God is if God helps us out. And so, original sin as we realize how far it drags us down, we also realize we're not still drugged down so far, but we have hope and we have promise, and we know that we are beloved children of God. We have that promise of salvation and redemption. So it's not like we're staying down wallowing in the pit. We have that promise. But why do we have that promise? Because Christ has done more than we ever could imagine. So when we appreciate original sin, one, if it's real, and there's no point in denying something that's not real. All that does is bring us harm later. I think a lot of the trouble with some of the movements that we see in the world today sometimes are that we're so focused on the wrong that we're trying to overcome that we never keep check on ourselves. And before we know it, often even in reforming movements, we turn into the very thing that we were trying to get away from because we stopped paying attention to any brokenness that was working inside of us. And also, if we don't appreciate original sin, then we're cheapening how we understand the works of Christ. Christ has done more than we can ever dream or imagine for our sake. And when we start talking like, oh, well, we just need to make a better choice, and we just need to be better, and we just need to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, all that we're doing in that is we're saying, Jesus, you didn't actually do that much for me. And so when we appreciate original sin, ultimately that drives us to simply, our jaw drops, and we think, holy cow, God, you are absolutely amazing because you've done more than I ever could have asked or imagined, but nonetheless, you did that for me. So friends, hopefully that is a helpful understanding of original sin. It's not really a fun topic to talk about. It reminds us daily that there's a brokenness in our life that we can't overcome, and yet it ultimately brings us, I think, to even greater joy, because as we realize how far we've fallen, we realize all the more how high Christ has truly lifted us, and all we can feel in that is all the more grateful for the good and wonderful God that we have. I look forward to talking about some more topics in the weeks to come, and I hope you have a wonderful, safe, and a blessed week ahead. Take care, friends.